Most people will look at this and see an old Toyota. I saw a Toyota with the engine sitting behind the driver, which is an unusual place to begin behaving like a Toyota. That wasn't the only one. Hello there, enthusiasts. Vance here. Over the years, ordinary traffic has quietly introduced me to some wonderfully suspicious engineering. A Toyota that borrowed an exotic car layout, a Volkswagen SUV wearing a tiny V10 badge like it was completely normal, a Saab that hid performance behind the personality of an accountant, and a Peugeot executive sedan that looked like it had wandered into the wrong meeting, then decided to stay anyway. None of them looked extraordinary. That's exactly why they were. They didn't demand attention, they rewarded it. The funny thing about being a car enthusiast is that your commute slowly stops looking like traffic and starts looking like a multiple choice question. Hang on, was that? Yes, usually it was. And once you notice one, you start noticing all of them. A tiny badge, an unusual silhouette, an engine where absolutely no sensible person will put one. Suddenly, the road feels a lot more interesting than it did 5 seconds ago. Today's cars have something in common: not horsepower, not country of origin, not even purpose. What they share is the ability to surprise people who take a second look. So let's start with the smallest car here. Ironically, also the one that asked one of the biggest engineering questions. What happens if Toyota stops being sensible for a while? Toyota has built its reputation on being sensible, reliable, dependable, the automotive equivalent of someone who actually reads the instruction manual. So the MR2 feels slightly out of character because at some point, Toyota looked at the world's exotic sports cars, noticed where they were putting the engine, and thought, that seems interesting. Instead of sitting over the front wheels like most Toyotas, the MR2 placed its engine directly behind the driver, a layout normally reserved for cars wearing badges that make your insurance company nervous. That wasn't done for shock value. It was done because physics doesn't care about marketing. Move the heaviest part of the car closer to its center, and something interesting happens. The car rotates more willingly, corners stop feeling like obstacles and start feeling like invitations. It's the same reason a figure skater spins faster after pulling their arms in. Less weight hanging over the ends, more control around the middle. Toyota understood that, which explains why a relatively modest amount of horsepower could feel so entertaining. The MR2 never needed enormous power. It simply made excellent use of what it had. That's something enthusiasts sometimes forget. A balanced car with 180 horsepower can be far more mobile than an unbalanced one with twice as much. The MR2 proved that. It wasn't trying to overpower the road, it was trying to work with it. That's a very different philosophy. And perhaps the most surprising part, Toyota made it reliable. Normally, when someone says it's a mid engine sports car, your wallet instinctively starts hiding. The MR2 somehow avoided most of that stereotype. It delivered an exotic driving experience without insisting on exotic ownership. That's an unusually generous offer. Over the years, the MR2 quietly built a loyal following, not because it was the fastest, not because it was the most expensive, because it made every corner feel like the engineer responsible had a sense of humor. That's a rare quality, and it's exactly why this photo caught my attention. To most people, it's an old Toyota. To the people who know, it's one of the most unconventional decisions Toyota ever signed off on. Which brings us neatly to the next car. Because if Toyota briefly borrowed an idea from Ferrari, Volkswagen looked at an SUV and completely lost interest in moderation. If the MR2 was Toyota experimenting, the Touareg was Volkswagen quietly showing off. The funny thing is, the first time I saw one, it didn't stand out. It was just another SUV making its way through traffic. Then I noticed something on the back, V10. Now that's an unusual thing to read on the tailgate of what appears to be a perfectly sensible family SUV. You don't expect to see it. Your brain almost pauses for a second. Hang on. Then the car disappears into traffic, leaving you wondering whether you actually read that correctly. As it turns out, I had. Because hidden beneath one of the most understated SUVs of the 2000s was a 5-liter twin-turbo charged V10 diesel. Even now, that sounds less like a production car and more like an engineer refusing to end the meeting. Most SUVs are designed around compromise: enough power, enough comfort, enough practicality. Volkswagen looked at enough and kept scrolling. The result wasn't just powerful, it produced an enormous amount of torque. The kind of torque that doesn't arrive, it introduces itself. You barely had to ask for acceleration. The Touareg had already filled the paperwork, and that's what made it such a brilliant sleeper. Nothing about the styling hinted at what lived underneath. No dramatic vents, no oversized spoiler, no unnecessary shouting. Just a clean looking SUV carrying one of the most outrageous diesel engine ever fitted to a production vehicle. Volkswagen even demonstrated its capability by towing a commercial aircraft, which is a wonderfully unnecessary way of saying, yes, it has enough torque. It's also one of those moments where the marketing department clearly asked, how do we get people's attention? And engineering replied, do you have access to an airport? Of course, building something this ambitious came with consequences: complexity, weight, maintenance that could occasionally feel like the vehicle was charging consultancy fees. But that's the trade off with ambitious engineering. Sometimes the best stories aren't the cheapest ones. Looking back, that 10 badge was doing a remarkable amount of work. 3 characters, 1 engineering flex, and a reminder that some of the most interesting cars don't announce themselves with noise. Sometimes they let the badge do the talking, which brings us to our next car. Because while Volkswagen hid 10 cylinders, Saab hid something even harder to explain: an entirely different way of thinking. The first time one caught my attention, it wasn't because it looked fast, quite the opposite. It was just another saloon blending into traffic. Then I noticed the badge on the bonnet: Saab. Now that's not a badge you see every day. Curiosity did the rest. Because the deeper I looked into the 9.3 Aero, the more one thing became obvious. Saab wasn't trying to build cars like everyone else. That makes a lot more sense when you realize Saab didn't start with cars. It started with aircraft. Suddenly, everything begins to click. The cockpit like driving position, the dashboard wrapping around the driver, the ignition between the seats, even the name Aero. These weren't random quirks. They were reminders that Saab's engineers approached the road with the mindset of people who had spent decades thinking about the sky. Most manufacturers built performance cars by making them louder. Saab built confidence instead. Under the bonnet, the turbocharged engine suited that philosophy perfectly. It didn't explode off the line demanding applause. It gathered itself, built boost, and then quietly disappeared into the distance while the other driver was still trying to work out what had just happened. That's a proper sleeper. No oversized spoiler, no aggressive body kit, no exhaust note loud enough to rearrange the neighborhood. Just thoughtful engineering wrapped in an ordinary looking saloon. The more I checked out Saab, the more I realized it wasn't trying to be different. It simply wasn't interested in copying everyone else. Sometimes that worked brilliantly. Sometimes it produced ideas that only Saab engineers could fully explain. Either way, they never built boring cars. Looking back, that little Saab badge on the bonnet was doing exactly what the V10 badge on the Touareg had done. It invited a second look. And that's all these cars ever needed. Because once you started paying attention, they had plenty to say. Now, our final car wasn't hiding performance, it was hiding ambition. Because when Peugeot built the 607, it walked into a room dominated by German luxury brands and politely acted like it belonged there. If the Saab hid a different way of thinking, the Peugeot 607 hid a different ambition. The first time I saw one, I had to look twice. Not because it looked unusual, because it looked like a Peugeot that had wandered into the executive parking lot. For a lot of people, Peugeot is a familiar name, and that largely because of cars like the legendary 504. The 504 built a reputation for toughness that stretched far beyond Europe. It earned respect on rough roads, covered enormous distances, and became one of those rare cars that felt at home almost anywhere. That's exactly why the 607 feels so unexpected. The company, famous for building one of the world's most durable family cars, had quietly built an executive flagship, not a hot hatch, not an off roader, an executive saloon. That's a fascinating shift because Peugeot wasn't trying to build another 504. It was trying to build something that could comfortably share a conversation with Mercedes, BMW, and Audi. That's an ambitious room to walk into, especially when those brands had spent decades making themselves the default choice. Peugeot walked in anyway, calmly, confidently, almost as if nobody had told it the odds. I have to admire that, not because the 607 outsold its rivals, it didn't, but because it existed at all. Manufacturers don't become memorable by playing itself all the time. Sometimes they become memorable by trying something unexpected. And that's exactly what the 607 represents. Looking back, the first glance told me I was looking at another Peugeot. The second glance told me a completely different story. This wasn't just another Peugeot. It was Peugeot asking a very difficult question. Why shouldn't we build an executive car? Whether the market agreed or not, I'm glad they asked. Because without companies occasionally aiming higher than expected, the automotive world becomes a much less interesting place. At first glance, these four cars have almost nothing in common. A mid engine Toyota, a Volkswagen SUV hiding a diesel V10, a Swedish turbocharged saloon built by a company with an aircraft pedigree, and a French executive car from the same manufacturer that gave the world the legendary 504. That's the strange thing about being a car enthusiast. Most people notice the loudest cars, the brightly colored supercars, the cars with enough vents to cool a small apartment. The rest of us occasionally stop what we are doing because a badge looks suspicious. I've realized some of my favorite automotive moments haven't happened at racetracks, motor shows, or even from behind the wheel. They've happened in completely ordinary traffic, waiting at a junction, walking through a car park, or noticing one tiny detail that completely changes the story. An engine in the middle of a Toyota, a V10 badge on a Volkswagen SUV, a Saab that quietly reminds you it came from a company that once built aircraft, a Peugeot that politely invited itself into Germany's executive car conversation. None of these cars demanded attention, they simply rewarded curiosity. And I think that's why they still matter. Not because they were perfect, not because they sold in huge numbers, but because they proved that some of the most interesting automotive stories don't announce themselves. They wait for someone to look twice. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and consider subscribing. I know the grammar police are not going to let me off the hook with the pronunciation of Peugeot. I started with Peugeot, I don't know. In Kenya we say Peugeot. Anyway, if you've ever spotted a car in everyday traffic that made you stop and think, hang on, what are you doing here? Leave it in the comments. There's a good chance it will send me down another automotive rabbit hole. And judging by this channel, I'm becoming strangely comfortable with that. Next time, we are talking about the Jaguar XJ. Not just one, but two. The original Series 1 that defined Jaguar for generations, and the X351 that dared to redefine it. And despite being separated by decades, they are part of the same story. I'll see you in the next one.